it's Rachel. I am surprised to be filming another video from the basement. I had planned on planting all of these lovely spring vegetables out last weekend, and then this happened. We had snow and a cold snap, and it just didn't make sense. So I am going to hopefully get these guys in the ground this week. In the meantime, they're actually doing okay. So even though these have now been sitting here for about 10 days longer than I originally planned, I'll do a close-up here in a second. You can see these are still quite healthy and happy. And the reason they're holding up really well and they haven't needed a bunch of special care or extra fertilizer while they've been in here is what I do with my potting mix. Last year, we had a similar thing where we had a cold snap and a late freeze in the spring, and I couldn't put my tomatoes out, so they sat inside a lot longer than I expected, and because I had good nutrition in these bags, they were totally fine. In my prior video on starting seeds in soil blocks, I mentioned my base blend is a 50-50 mix of worm castings from my worm farm, which I like because they're free, and coconut coir. I also add several organic amendments to the soil mix right from the get-go. I will do this in per plant amounts, and then at the end I'll walk through how I do the math for my own particular bulk mix so that you can hopefully translate the same for your own situation. You want nitrogen. Nitrogen supports healthy leaf production, foliage production, which is how the plant makes its energy and draws its sustenance. Nitrogen is important. You can burn your plants if you use something that's really highly soluble. And so I like to use blood meal. Just pretend I'm holding a bag of blood meal. When I made this last batch, I used up all my blood meal and I threw away the container, and I didn't think about the fact that I might do a video. So pretend I've got a bag of blood meal. I'll put a link below to the one that I buy. But it works really well. It puts nitrogen in the soil and it will not burn your plants. You want 1/3 cup per plant. The other material that really matters that I use a lot is bone meal, and this is for phosphorus. The reason that you want phosphorus for your plants is that it supports healthy flowers, it supports healthy roots, and it supports healthy fruit set. So phosphorus is a critical element. Again, nothing chemical here. The bone meal is a natural source. It won't burn your plants. It will break down very slowly in the soil. You want 1 to 2 tablespoons of bone meal. And last but not least, you need potassium for healthy roots on your plants. I use kelp meal for this. Again, you don't need much. This is 1 teaspoon per plant. And so you buy these bags, they can seem a little expensive versus just a chemical fertilizer, but they last a really long time. I did run out of my blood meal, but I've been using that same bag now for I think a couple of years, so I'm getting good value for the money. There are 2 more nutrients that I think about for specifically tomatoes and peppers. Tomatoes and peppers both need a significant amount of magnesium in order to have healthy flowers and then subsequently a good, fruit set and a good crop. And the good news is it's not expensive. So what I will do is Epsom salts, and I do not put this into the mix. Instead, I dissolve it in water. I have a 1/2 gallon pitcher that I use for bottom watering my plants. And when I'm bottom watering the tomatoes and peppers, those are all usually in the same flat for me. I will add, you want to put 1/2 tablespoon per gallon of water when you're watering. Because my pitcher is a 1/2 gallon, I put in 1/4 of a tablespoon, which is 3/4 of a teaspoon. So I'll put 3/4 of a teaspoon of this into my 1/2 gallon pitcher. The other one specifically, and this one is tomatoes, it's peppers, it's also squash. They need calcium to prevent blossom end rot. The thing to bear in mind here is, I use finely powdered eggshells. I just save eggs as I cook them. I save the eggshells, clean them really well, dry them, and then run them through a spice grinder that I use for just this purpose. This will not be readily available to the plant that I'm putting in the ground. Eggshells take a long time to break down. What I'm really doing is just ensuring that the calcium that this plant that I'm putting in the ground is going to take away will be replenished for subsequent years of crops. So I'm not really putting this in for the plant I'm planting now. I'm putting it in for future plants. And so I just will put about 2 tablespoons of this straight into my biodegradable planting bag for my tomatoes, for my peppers, and for my squash to replenish that nutrient in the soil over time. Last, how I make this bulk. So 1 tray of my worm bin plus an equal amount of coconut coir, I have found over time fills this container, not all the way to the top, but maybe a couple inches from the top. And this is a 35 quart Sterilite container. It's meant for underbed storage. I find that it's great for this. The snap lid helps keep things from getting messy. It also helps retain moisture when you're going in between batches and making soil blocks. And it's just a really convenient size. Again, it's the perfect size for the worm bin that I have. And it's not too heavy. So even when this is full, it's something I can still lift, which is important. So I've settled on this. I've used it for years. I like it. 35 quarts is, fun math ahead. All right, 35 quarts is 140 cups. And I have found that my grow bags will hold 5 cups of planting mix, which means that this container, when I do a full batch of my potting mix, is enough for 28 plants. And if you remember the 1/3 cup of blood meal, when you multiply that by 28 plants, you end up with about 9 1/3 cups of blood meal. Because this container isn't 100% full when I make it, I round these numbers down. So in my case, I will put in 9 cups of blood meal, which is a lot, but it's for an entire batch that basically does my whole growing season. To scale the bone meal, as a reminder, we had 1.5 tablespoons per plant. Multiply that out by 28 plants, and I end up, again, rounding down a little bit, with about 2.5 cups of the bone meal that I want to put in. The kelp meal for my potassium, I only need 1 teaspoon per plant. Multiply that out by 28 plants, and I end up needing, again, rounding down, 1/2 cup of that. 9 cups of blood meal, 2.5 cups of bone meal, and 1/2 cup of kelp meal. Stir and blend, and I've got my whole batch that I can use for soil blocks as well as for potting up my plants, noting the bottom watering with Epsom salts and the addition of those eggshells in the bags for squash, tomatoes, and peppers. I hope that's helpful for anybody else that wants to use organic amendments in their potting blend. Next week, I will finally show you the video I wanted to post this week, which is a lasagna composting process that we're doing in our raised beds. We decided this year to build the beds a little higher. Now that we're not in COVID quarantine, we can actually go out and buy stuff. So we raised our beds a little higher. We're doing some lasagna, sheet composting in the beds, and we're going to be planting into that. I will show that next time. In the meantime, I hope this is helpful, and I hope it helps set you up for success in your growing season. Thanks.